A few weeks ago, I was chatting to the Vice Prime Minister of Mauritius. He's also the Finance Minister of that nation at the World Economic Forum on Africa. And he said he was over here to, type a few loose ends, sign a few treaties, that sort of thing. Maybe one of them has just come to the fore, because it says here that South Africa has signed a new tax treaty with Mauritius, and that's according to PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. It goes on to say that the abuse of the old 1996 treaty was the main reason for the new treaty. And let's discuss that now in greater detail. In the Power Lunch Johannesburg studio is Kyle Mandy, who's the head of National Tax Technical at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Kyle, can we just go back a step and go back to what the original deal is, which was formulated in 1996?
Yeah, certainly, Lindsay. I mean, I think if you had a look at that treaty, there were certain things that were particularly favourable from a South African perspective in that regard, or at least in terms of giving tax relief from a South African perspective. One of them was that inbound investment into South Africa in property-rich companies was relieved of South African capital gains tax, and then the treaty provided beneficial rates of tax from the point of view of royalties and interest in particular.
What would be a typical deal, for example, a South African company, which is a multinational company, wanted to set up headquarters in Mauritius? What would be the procedure and what would they get out of it, if you could put it in layman's terms, so we can then judge why the treaty has had to be amended?
Well, one of the main benefits that South African multinationals have enjoyed in terms of going through Mauritius, aside from the tax, is managing to get outside of the South African exchange control net. So that's been one of the main drivers of investment into Mauritius. But aside from that, there are certain tax advantages for investing through Mauritius, most notably in the sense that South African corporate investors are able to effectively invest in such a way that they're actually able to harvest tax-free interest out of their foreign operations. So that was one of the main drivers, and that's driven off by the reason that Mauritius is a low-tax jurisdiction.
From a PwC point of view, has it been abused in the number of years since it's been in effect, since '96?
Well, Lindsay, I think that's more perception than anything else. Yeah, if you create advantages in your treaty network, you can only expect that investors are going to take advantage of that. Maybe the perception there is in government that it's been abused, but overall, has it really been abused? I don't think so.
It's obviously concerning, though, because if you go to the Business Day Live website, it was the top story a couple of hours ago, and the article starts there. It says, changes to the double tax treaty between South Africa and Mauritius are bound to cause uncertainty amongst local multinationals that had registered their businesses in the Indian Ocean island. People don't like change. Should they be afraid?
Yes, there's no question in this regard, Lindsay. The major change that affects outbound South African multinationals who are investing through Mauritius is in relation to the tiebreaker clause from a residence perspective. Now, to put that into context, that's extremely important in determining which country has taxing rights. Now, in terms of the current treaty, which is in line with the OECD standards, the tiebreaker clause is where the company in question is effectively managed. Now, under the new treaty, that will change, and the tiebreaker clause will no longer be effective management, but will now be by mutual agreement between the two tax authorities. Now, that's where the uncertainty comes in.
Yeah, and what about the companies that have already taken advantage of the...
Well, Kyle, we seem to have lost that link to Lindsay and having technical trouble there, but challenges moving forward as you foresee them?
Well, the real challenge is in the question of certainty. Taxpayers hate uncertainty, and this is likely just to lead to further uncertainty, particularly in relation to those borderline cases where it's relatively uncertain whether effective management lies in South Africa or in Mauritius. Mm-hmm. Those are the companies that will be really concerned by the new treaty.
Well, we seem to have Lindsay back online.
Kyle, I think that it's... Yes, I am. Kyle, I'm sorry about that. It caught me in a particularly unpleasant freeze frame there as well. But I was going to say, does it affect companies that have already invested in this scheme, or rather taken advantage of the 96 treaty, or is it from the new treaty that and new companies going in that the effects will take place?
No, absolutely. It will affect existing investments. The new rules will then apply once the treaty comes into effect, which will be the first calendar year after it has been ratified by both countries. So yes, it will affect existing investments. It won't just be prospective.
Looking at the other alternatives for South African companies, obviously South Africa and Mauritius have got a history of cooperation. But if there is uncertainty surrounding the future relationships, then people can always look at other areas, like, for example, Dubai or Botswana. Is that likely to happen?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I think that there will be clear-cut cases where South African outbound investors will be quite happy to invest through Mauritius, knowing that their case is likely to be particularly secure. And there are advantages with Mauritius, not least of which that it has a relatively decent treaty network itself. But yes, other jurisdictions, as you mentioned, like Dubai, are likely to benefit more than anything else, as opposed to South Africa benefiting.
And you sum it up quite neatly by saying, in essence, the good news, though, is that South Africa will still have a tax treaty with Mauritius in the future. It hasn't been culled immediately, which would have caused all sorts of indignation and uncertainty. We still have a treaty not quite as favourable as in the past.
Not quite as favourable, and yes, we do have a treaty. There is one point of warning, though, and that's in relation to that tie-bracket clause, is that under that treaty, if the tax authorities in both South Africa and Mauritius fail to reach agreement, then the treaty will not apply, save for certain exchange of information provisions. So if you sit in one of those borderline cases where it's uncertain who has taxing rights under the treaty, it could be problematic, and we could see double tax.